My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 63 years old, and I'm a retired librarian. The smell of cinnamon and pine needles usually fills my home around the holidays, a comforting blanket of tradition. But this year, it was sharp with tension. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, stood by my mantelpiece, her designer coat still on, a sneer twisting her perfectly made-up face. My son, Mark, stood beside her, looking at the floor, his usual animated expression replaced by a blank mask. Sarah gestured vaguely around my living room, the one I'd lived in for 40 years, the one where Mark had grown up. Honestly, Eleanor, she said, loud enough for the few early guests to hear, I don't know why you even bother to be here. It's not like anyone expects you to host anymore. My stomach clenched, a familiar knot of hurt and disbelief, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I simply met her gaze, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. Sarah's eyes narrowed, sensing something she couldn't quite place, but she had no idea the house she was trying to claim was about to be pulled right out from under her. To understand why I didn't react with the anger she clearly expected, you need to know about Sarah and the slow erosion of my family life. Mark was my only child. His father, David, passed away suddenly when Mark was just 22. David and I had built this house together, brick by brick, memory by memory. It was more than just a structure, it was the anchor of our family, filled with heirlooms and the quiet hum of generations. One of those heirlooms was my mother's old rocking chair, a sturdy oak piece with worn arms, tucked into a sunlit corner of the living room. It was where I read, where I comforted a scraped knee, where I simply sat and watched the world go by. Mark met Sarah 4 years after his father died. She was vibrant, ambitious, and utterly captivating, a whirlwind of energy that swept my quiet son off his feet. I tried to welcome her, truly. I baked her favorite cookies, offered advice when she asked, and made sure she felt like part of our family. But from the beginning, there was a subtle undercurrent. Sarah had a way of complimenting something in my home, a vase, a painting, even the rocking chair, then following it with a suggestion on how it could be updated or better displayed. She'd laugh, a light, dismissive sound, and Mark would often join in, making me feel like an outdated relic myself. The first real crack appeared when they announced their engagement. Sarah immediately took over all the wedding planning, dismissing my suggestions for a local venue in favor of a lavish resort 2 states away. It's just so much more us, Eleanor, she'd said, touching Mark's arm possessively. Mark, who used to love our small, intimate family gatherings, just nodded. I saw his quiet deference to her even then, a willingness to please that outweighed his own preferences. I thought it was just the excitement of a young couple, but that detail mattered later. After they married, the visits to my house became less frequent, and when they did come, Sarah seemed to subtly rearrange things. A vase would be moved, a throw blanket folded differently. Once, I came downstairs to find the rocking chair had been pushed into the dining room, replaced by a sleek, modern side table Sarah had brought. Oh, that old thing was just cluttering up the space, Eleanor, she'd said, waving a hand. It's much better in there. I moved it back, of course, but the message was clear, my home, my choices, were secondary to hers. Mark would just shrug when I mentioned it, saying, you know how Sarah is, Mom. She just likes things to be fresh. The real pressure began when their first child, Lily, was born. Sarah, a marketing executive, had big plans for Lily's future, which seemed to involve exclusive private schools and international travel. Mark, now working in a mid-level management position, couldn't quite keep up with her escalating desires. That was when the numbers stopped looking accidental. Sarah started making pointed comments about my large house and how it was such a shame to have all that equity just sitting there. She'd talk about Lily's future, about how much they needed a down payment for a bigger house, always with a wistful glance at my property. Mark would bring it up more directly, asking if I'd considered downsizing or investing in something more liquid. It wasn't an outright demand, but a constant, gentle drip of suggestion, designed to wear me down. I loved my grandchildren, Lily and her younger brother, Tom, fiercely. But Sarah began to control my access to them. Calls weren't returned, visits were cancelled last minute, always with a vague excuse. When I did see them, Sarah would often hover, correcting my parenting advice or even my choice of storybooks. One afternoon, I was reading to Lily in the rocking chair, a book I'd read to Mark countless times. Sarah walked in, snatched the book, and replaced it with a Brig. HTLY colored, educational tablet. "We're trying to encourage digital literacy, Eleanor," she said, her voice tight. "Old books are just so inefficient." Lily looked up at me, confused, and I felt a fresh pang of recognition. Sarah wasn't just trying to control me, she was trying to erase my influence entirely, to cut me out of my grandchildren's lives, and by extension, Mark's. She wanted to be the sole matriarch, the undisputed center. Over the past year, her comments about the house escalated. She'd started planning holidays and family gatherings at her house, even though mine was larger and better suited for entertaining. She'd talk about when we eventually take over, or what we'll do with the extra space. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about asserting ownership, about making me feel like a temporary occupant in my own home. I realized Sarah wasn't just being difficult, she genuinely believed she had a right to my property, my role, my very presence. She saw my house as a future asset for her and Mark, and me as an obstacle. What I didn't understand yet was how far she was willing to push. It was then that I started to prepare. As a librarian, I understood the power of documentation and clear structures. I called my lawyer, a kind woman named Susan who had handled David's estate. I explained the situation, the subtle manipulations, the constant pressure regarding the house. Susan listened patiently, then laid out my options. I could, of course, simply ignore Sarah. But that wouldn't stop the pressure, nor would it protect my assets or my peace of mind. We discussed a living trust, a legal document that would transfer ownership of my house into the trust, with me as the primary beneficiary and trustee. This would make it incredibly difficult for anyone to challenge my ownership or dictate its future. More importantly, it would ensure that the house, upon my passing, would go directly to my grandchildren, Lily and Tom, to be held in trust until they were 25, bypassing Mark and Sarah entirely. I spent weeks meticulously gathering information, not just legal documents, but also old family photos, letters, and even David's journals, all affirming the history and sentiment tied to this house. I didn't tell Mark or Sarah about any of this. It wasn't about revenge, it was about preservation. Preservation of my legacy, my home, and my self-respect. I signed the papers for the living trust 3 months before that fateful Christmas party. The house was no longer just mine, it was legally protected, a fortress against Sarah's ambition. I also quietly updated my will, ensuring that other sentimental items, like the rocking chair, would go directly to Lily, with instructions that it be kept in the family. So, when Sarah delivered her cutting remark about me bothering to be here, I was ready. The small, knowing smile wasn't a sign of weakness or a forced pleasantry. It was the quiet triumph of someone who had seen the attack coming and had already built her defenses. Sarah, momentarily thrown by my unexpected reaction, recovered quickly. "Well, if you insist on hosting, Eleanor, at least try to keep up," she sniffed, turning to Mark. "Honestly, this place could use a serious overhaul." Mark, finally looking up, seemed to notice the tension. "Sarah," he began, a flicker of discomfort on his face. But I cut him off, my voice calm and clear, carrying just enough to reach the few guests who were now subtly watching. "Actually, Sarah," I said, stepping forward, my smile still in place, "I don't insist on anything. This is my home. I simply am here. And I will continue to be here for as long as I choose." I paused, letting that sink in. "And as for an overhaul, that won't be necessary. As of 3 months ago, this house is officially held in a living trust. It's not part of any future inheritance for you or Mark. It will pass directly to Lily and Tom when they come of age. So, any overhaul plans you might have had, well, they're moot." The air in the room became absolutely still. Sarah's perfectly made-up face drained of color, her jaw going slack. Mark, who had been about to speak, looked utterly stunned, his mouth slightly open. He finally met my gaze, a mix of hurt and betrayal in his eyes, but also a dawning comprehension. The few guests present exchanged uncomfortable glances, quickly finding reasons to move away or engage in hushed conversations. Sarah found her voice first, a choked whisper. You did what?" "I protected my home, Sarah," I replied, my voice still even. "And my grandchildren's future. This house holds too many memories, too much love, to be treated as a mere asset for someone else's convenience or ambition." The rest of the evening was a blur of strained politeness. Sarah was furious, of course. She cornered Mark, her voice low and sharp, though I could still hear snippets of her angry accusations. Mark, for his part, avoided my eyes for the rest of the night. They left early, without saying goodbye, their holiday spirit thoroughly shattered. The aftermath was quiet, but profound. Mark didn't call for days. When he finally did, his voice was tight with anger. He accused me of betrayal, of cutting him out, of being vindictive. I listened patiently, then explained, calmly, about the years of subtle pressure, the attempts to control, the constant push for my assets. "This wasn't about cutting you out, Mark," I told him. "It was about protecting what was mine, and ensuring your children would inherit a legacy, not just a commodity." It was a difficult conversation, one that laid bare years of unspoken resentments. He didn't fully understand, not then, but I could hear a crack in his usual deference to Sarah. Sarah stopped coming to my house altogether. She made it clear through Mark that she felt personally attacked and deeply insulted. My access to Lily and Tom became even more restricted for a time, a painful consequence I had anticipated. But I didn't back down. I started sending cards, small gifts, and calling when I knew Mark would be home alone, asking to speak to the children. Slowly, tentatively, Mark started facilitating it. He even started bringing them over himself, sometimes without Sarah. One afternoon, a few months later, Mark brought Lily and Tom over. Sarah was away on a business trip. Lily, now 7, immediately gravitated to the old rocking chair. She climbed in, her small legs dangling, and began to rock gently, a book open on her lap. Mark watched her, then looked at me. "She always loved that chair," he said quietly, a hint of his old self in his voice. I nodded, a soft ache in my chest. The house still smelled of cinnamon, but now, it felt truly mine again, filled with the quiet comfort of belonging. And in that moment, watching my granddaughter rock gently in my mother's chair, I knew I had done the right thing.